Good morning. Discussing epidemics is sort of an interesting thing because we've referenced the epidemic of 1918, and it came to the forefront when we had our epidemic. And I began to wonder, well, what was it like back then? That was over 100 years ago. And I'd never, ever read anything about that epidemic of 1918 except reference like, oh, he died in the epidemic of 1918. And with this epidemic, I began to wonder, what is it like for ordinary people? And that led me to say, well, maybe we need to record, not that it will be read from ages hence, but because we needed to have a voice for our time. What we experienced with this epidemic was a denial of science. Meanwhile, thousands were dying. There was a shortage of protective wear, hospitals overcome, and docs and nurses at risk. As a culture, we all saw this, lived in fear, and became the country most affected by the virus with 500 million deaths. Unusual for leaders of the free world and the richest country that ever was. We saw men making decisions that seemed in denial of what was happening, irrational. And were men supposed to be the rational sex and women the irrational ones? The whole situation became politicized. And that's where we are still today, with folks not wearing masks or doing the vaccines. The pandemic, as it was soon labeled, was touted as a democratic hoax, and many people still believe that. And I'm wondering what historians will make of it all. My decision that a book about this experience told by elder women in the first few months of the pandemic was essential, I thought, to understanding it from a personal as well as historical level. When I heard this pandemic could go on for months, even years, that not much was known about it except it could be deadly to vulnerable people, older people like myself, I began to wonder if I would live the rest of my days under the cloud of this dreaded disease. All these decisions by men in our government seemed irrational, expedient, and without merit in the reality we lived in. I asked my friend, who is a doctor, to join me in enlisting women, which she enthusiastically did. We worked fast. We began March 20th, 2020, almost a year ago. And that same year, our deadline for essays was about 6 weeks later, May 20th of that same year. 400 to 1,200 were. I somehow had the idea I wanted these first impressions of our new life with the pandemic, thinking that as it went on, we may come to see it as just there, accepting it with no qualms anymore, just, oh, it's just the pandemic. 40 women responded enthusiastically and wanted to be a part of this venture. And so Women Elders Speak, Reflections on the Pandemic, was in full swing that spring of 2020. Many of these women had never been asked before to give a considered written impression, and yet each essay in this book is heartfelt and moving because what they are experiencing, the death and dying around them, the fear for themselves and loved one, is their day-to-day reality. The cover of this book was happily donated by Nina Alexander and comes from a poem, "When I fear death, I eat stars." her visual translation of this lovely poem by Rebecca Elson. It also seemed to me to represent the spirit of those women in this book. When they dreaded death, they started to eat stars. The essays in this reflect many different experiences by older women. When the essays came in and I read them, it was a balm to the irrational information coming from our political leaders. Here were voices of women from all walks of life experiencing this strange, sequestered, and fearful time. Reading and editing these essays, I began to really see what is that I was experiencing? What is it? There was not only the pandemic, there was flooding and fires. There was a government so out of touch that it made for a surreal kind of reality. I watched the continued denial of the virus. We have so many cases because there is too much testing. I never could figure that out. I thought of our Unitarian principles, one of which is democratic process, which respectively gives each individual a voice, a vote. The news and Netflix, whether our contacts with the outer world and phone calls. We talked to our friends about what was happening to democracy by phone, by Zoom. Memories invaded our quiet times, of which we had many. And here, I would like to read a small part of my essay about a memory I have of the Constitution. This is the cover, isn't it wonderful? I am taken back to my youth when I was 14 years old. All the early junior high and high school students took the bus to Missoula to see the Freedom Train. Our history teacher explained that it was the honor to be able to view these important documents, the foundation of the democracy signed into law by our forefathers, the founders of our great nation. I learned that the Constitution, Bill of Rights, gives citizens the right to assemble, to protest, and a vote. There was even a letter from Christopher Columbus. I was really impressed. Their purpose was educational, but also to install patriotism. The Heritage Foundation, sponsors of that train, mandated that all voices were to mingle on the 7-car train, or the train would not stop in that state. 2 states refused to be on the train with African Americans: Memphis, Tennessee, and Birmingham, Alabama. Bless their old hearts. The train, true to this edict, raced through those states. But for me, a 14-year-old girl, I never forgot it. And I honored the Constitution all my life. Our next speaker is Sara Williams, who is the co-owner with her daughter of a wonderful recycled books business. And she is our next speaker. Thank you very much.
At 77 years of age, I guess I qualify as an elder. I am honored. We live in a remote mountain location outside Bozeman, Montana. For over 40 years, we have lived in a modified form of isolation. As a friend told me recently, you have been practicing for dealing with a pandemic for many years. There is some truth to that. My daughter and son-in-law live next to us and keep us supplied with food and other necessities when I am unable to get out. I am so thankful for the love and support of our family. After the pandemic took hold, the tempo of my life did slow down. I have had the luxury of more time for reflection, observation, and learning about the crisis our nation was and is experiencing. For me, these times required soul-searching, reflection, and educating myself on the issues of the day. To me, our country is in chaos. It had been in a state of chaos for over 4 years. With the COVID-19, that chaos just intensified. I was thinking of the families that have lost loved ones, of those who had lost their jobs, homes, and needed services that were once in place and had evaporated. On top of all of that, we were faced with the challenges of systemic racism, anger, hatred. This social disease has been tearing us apart for many, many years. In some ways, the leadership of the former administration gave permission for the hatred and bigotry, which had been dormant for years, to raise its ugly head. In retrospect, maybe that resurfacing was and is the only way of confronting the ugliness of racism once and for all, forcing us to face the reality of fear, anger, and bigotry in our own lives. From my viewpoint, there has been some relief to some of our biggest and most acute hurdles, but we have a long, long way to go. What can we as UUs do to affect the moral challenges we face? The past 4 years, and especially the last year, many of the UU services have provided a positive approach in identifying our current and long-time challenges and giving options and avenues in dealing with these difficult issues. We are so grateful for this fellowship. I also feel especially close to my dear friends in our UUFB humanist group. I have learned so much from our bi-weekly Zoom discussions on topics ranging from artificial intelligence to current events. For instance, at our next meeting, we will be discussing the 14th Amendment of our Constitution, a topic which I was so uninformed. As of now, I've had my first COVID vaccine. I will get my second next week. I miss the face-to-face exchanges, the hugs from dear friends. That will happen. I don't know about the other issues our society faces. I have to remain hopeful. Finally, I would like to thank dear Joanne for providing a forum for us to share our reflections, our joys, and our sadnesses. It has been a cathartic exercise. The next presenter is Joy LaClaire, a member of the UUFB and a music producer who gives interviews for KGVM and Bozeman Community Radio. You will hear her voice accompanying the photos she has chosen for illustration. Following Joy will be Susan Backer, our morning's lay leader and a retired teacher.
Fragments found in a fallowed field by Joy LaClaire. Epigraph. Take a rest. A field that has rested gives a beautiful crop. Seattle Graffito by Deborah Spencer. 1. Haikus on this 1st of June, 2020. The Predator drones have flown home, circle above Minneapolis. White man, White House hides. American carnage rides banal evil tides. Watch currents, not tides, streams within oceans, flowing one direction, surge. Trifectas converge, sea level rises, virus spreads unseen, now this. White supremacists insist, peace without justice, the rest cry, resist. Locked down since March, march. Defy curfews, pandemics, together at last. Too much is too much. The end of May becomes, must change now, wait no more. Straw breaks camel's back, long hot summer begins. Fires ignite shorter nights. 1st of June. Streets strewn with burnt-out shops and cop cars. Revolution now! 2. In this country. In this country, we learn geography by invading foreign lands. In this country, we learn calculus from daily exponential growth of death counts on graphs. In this country, you can fool some of the people all of the time. In this country, when money talks, it doesn't walk. It flies faster than the speed of sound on private jets, socially distances on yachts. In this country, United States has come to mean every state stands alone, competing with the others to survive. In this country, the commander-in-chief's gut trumps science, the evidence, common sense. In this country, the buck never stops at his desk, no matter how reckless he gets. In this country, we get the news on late-night comedy shows, but who's laughing now? In this country, it's hard to separate news that's fake from true. In this country, what can one do? 3. Eine kleine RNA. It's just a little RNA, all uncontained now run away, willy-nilly holding sway from poorhouse to White House, from your house to my house. Such clever little RNA, not alive, thus so hard to kill, sneakily spreading sans symptoms for weeks or months or years, all around the world, from there and now to here. Just a little RNA, silently riding while hiding, host to host, immune to magic and presidential boast. Just a little RNA, unconcerned by the big guy's bluster and blunder. The rest of us left to wonder how we failed the test to be able to test, not to mention all the rest.
I had a very hard time agreeing to Joanne's several requests to me to contribute to this book. I didn't quite understand it myself. I loved to write. I thought the project was worthy and really important. But deep down, I didn't think that what I had to say was important enough to be included because it was so very personal. Here we were in the middle of global health and political catastrophes. I felt others would have so much more to say on those topics, which I cared about too, but which I believed others would express more powerfully. And of course they did, as witnessed in the book and the presentations today. But I thought my contributions would be lightweight. And yet, I knew I was going through a profoundly emotional and psychological experience that would have been different without the pandemic. I knew that others were going through similar events as well, and I finally convinced myself that it would be okay to share my thoughts. The worth and dignity of every person, our very first principle. I guess I had just never thought about needing to grant it to myself as well, to honor the worth of the story that I had been living last spring. I've reflected on the deepest social connections that I have, which are with this UU community, and that had been interrupted in so many ways. This is what I wrote, which may mirror what some of you have felt or are still feeling. On Sunday mornings now, I go to my den and turn on the computer to participate in the streaming services. As the minister lights the chalice, I light my own. I sing along with the hymns, listen to the sermon, and hear the joys and concerns. But it's definitely not the same as being physically in the church. I miss the hugs, the handshakes, the arms about the shoulders, as we interact and share our lives with each other. Some Sundays, I leave the video on so that my picture's on the side of the screen with other participants. Sometimes I can't do that because I'm feeling vulnerable and know that scenes of the empty sanctuary with the deeply meaningful altar screens and the words and melodies of the hymns will bring tears. The altar screens in particular bring back so many memories of the folks who designed them, contributed fabric, and helped to make them. Those screens were a grounding identity for us as we move from rental space to rental space over more than 50 years. What a great irony it is now that after working decades to have our own building, finally acquired in 2015, that our beautiful sanctuary space now stands empty. End of the quotation. My difficult personal loss last spring was, some might say, only a pet. My beloved little dog, Abby. She had been my constant companion through a 5-year period when I had lost first my father, then my mother, and then my husband. When all of the family and friends had gone home, she had been steadfastly by my side to comfort me, to help me laugh, to give me a reason to keep a daily routine. Losing Abby in the beginning months of the COVID isolation was deeply painful, but it also served as a symbol for me to acknowledge and mourn the overwhelming losses all of us have suffered in so many ways, on so many levels, individually and collectively. My greatest hope is that we will be able to come out of this period of time with a changed perspective, with renewed courage to live our lives with compassion and intention, to reach out to all of those around us, to live our UU principles out into this fractured and hurting world. Our final speaker today will be Mattie Whitehouse, a UUFB member and a retired Northwest Airlines service agent.
If I had taken an anger management course this past year, I surely would have failed. When I heard all of the conflicting information coming from Washington, D.C., New York City, and all around the world, I knew that that this was not a good thing. Not wanting to appear cavalier,
about the world pandemic, I didn't fear for myself. I feared for my daughters, one a NICU nurse, the other a doctor. And I've especially feared for my two grandsons, age 2. We seem to believe this experience is unique, but it isn't the first time a pandemic has destroyed large swaths of the human population. We always bounce back, increasing the population each time. At last count, just shy of 8 billion humans. This is how every virus, man-made or natural, thrives. Large populations crammed together and our touchy-feely ways of socializing. The opportunistic virus has found the perfect host, and it is thriving and multiplying. We have suffered through television and radio ads spouting platitudes you might find in a high school yearbook, such as, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. Well, you're still in the tunnel if you see the light. My favorite is, we are all in this together. Are we really all in this together? I think not. Our American privilege prevents us from seeing the world from another perspective. Our behavior has been classically selfish. When we should be thinking of those less fortunate, we think of ourselves and hoard what brings us comfort. In this country, the golden rule has changed to do it to others before they do it to you. I fear for our country, a country divided racially, religiously, politically, and economically. And if anything, I see the wedge being driven further down. This test is going to be the turning point of our country's survival and that of democracy. In times of turmoil, in times of turmoil and crisis, countries look towards their elected officials for information, guidance, strength, hope, a person who is capable of leading with compassion, truthfulness, and grace. We had a leader unlike any other. He was incapable of giving any of the aforementioned. Meanwhile, our standing in the eyes of the world has been severely diminished, and we find that our educational system is inferior and our healthcare is inadequate and inequitable. I fear for our, I'm sorry, lastly, I fear for our earth and our fellow travelers. They certainly don't deserve what we have done to them. Overuse of pesticides has poisoned their land and water, and fossil fuel use has poisoned the air and their environs. And our large carbon footprint is responsible for the destruction of flora and fauna alike. We have put all life on Earth on a path of extinction. Life has been on this planet for about 1.6 billion years, and we share the same common ancestors. We are not as special as we would like to believe, sharing 98% of our genes with the chimpanzee and the bonobo, 85% with the cow, 47% with the fruit fly, and 24% with a grain of rice. We have marched across the continents, destroying the environment and the Earth's inhabitants as we go. The great ape with the great brain is not so powerful. He can be brought down by a microscopic virus. This is our chance to improve and prove ourselves worthy of sharing this globe. In the past few months, our air and water quality have improved, and wild animals are trying to reclaim some of the territory we have stolen from them. Our Mother Earth wants to heal and can if given the chance. She is resilient. We are all in this together.